I think risk is inherent in just about everything that you do. And I think that a lot of people, not just businessmen, but people, misconceive what risk actually are, right? The Bahamas has a gambling culture. We don't talk about risk when it comes to that. We don't talk too much about risk when it comes to that. The Christian Council, let's talk about it. But for the masses that in the web cafe and on their phone, they don't talk about it. But when it comes to crypto, it's, you just could lose everything if you put, So I definitely think that risk is applied in a very subjective manner when it comes to things. And it's just like the things that are actually risky.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the CryptoNoobz Podcast, where we talk about cryptocurrency and the world around it. I'm your host, NelsonRecardo.x, and I'm joined here with my co-host,
Lamont Aswad, aka Lambo242. And today, we have a highly esteemed guest, a personal friend of mine, an expert in the space. We got Khyle Higgs from Unique Digital Assets.
What's up, everybody? Hope you guys are doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel like this is long overdue. Lamont, Nelson, sorry it took me so long, but it's great to be here with y'all and looking forward to the conversation.
We thank you for joining us, man.
Yeah, man.
Definitely, it's going to be a great conversation. Just a casual conversation, just let the people know, especially like we got three Bahamians right now talking, and we get somebody who could really advise them and teach them things in the space, I don't want to go back to this, but we met at a conference for FTX. I mean, we knew each other way before that, right?
Way back.
I think at the time you were the officer for Delchain, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and you made the transition to Unique Digital Assets as a sales executive. So just describe to us, how has that transition been? And with the whole, how has things been since that whole debacle in 2022? Like, just explain how your journey has been since then. And give us some background on who you are.
Yeah, so I've been in the digital asset space for, this is year 5 now. June will make 5 years exact. And I feel like I've been in it for the craziest 5 years so far. But hey, we are here. Still in it. Still going to be in it past 5. Knock on wood. Bruno, if you see this, don't fire me. But yeah, man. In 2021, I actually joined Delchain as an operations officer. Before that, I was in banking as an operations officer at Credit Suisse. I loved my time there. I was working my butt off, literally, but quite literally learned a lot of skills at Credit Suisse that were interchangeable to the digital asset space. Workflows, reconciliations, all of these things, managing, essentially complete core banking system. And then finding a way to bring that over to digital assets was the biggest reason that I left banking to come to Delchain. I had a former colleague of mine, Dramico Moore. So I'll be doing a lot of shout outs on this question. But Dramico essentially was my manager at a previous job to Credit Suisse called Short Trader. So worked there as a trader and a brokerage ops analyst. And Dramico was then at Delchain, and he was just like, yo, we need someone essentially to come in and rework our operations, different workflows, find new efficiencies, all of that. I'm like, okay, cool. I would do it. I hadn't taken vacation at Credit Suisse in like 10 years. So I was 2 years. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. After about 5 interviews with Bruno, I was out of there. So Bruno Macchiali was my CEO at Delchain. Funny story, he's my CEO at Unique Digital Assets now. But one thing that I learned with Bruno is that Bruno is definitely one to give opportunity. And if you succeed, Bruno's going to make that opportunity more of a shift than just a one-off occasion. So, I'm at Delchain now. We accomplish a lot. So, we find ways to mitigate unsettled trades, which created better cash flow for us in the long term and a better client experience. Also made our settlements faster, and we also made them more efficient. When I first came in, I think on the banking side, we only could have done, e-transfers of about 100K. Otherwise, we would have to loop in our client services team on the Deltec side. And that would take, pretty much a couple hours. So just new efficiencies that we appealed for within the group, things like that, we were able to do within the first 6 months. Fast forward to 2022, and, a lot's happening in the space. at the end of 2021, markets were like around 69K on Bitcoin, but markets, as you know, crashed in 2022. A lot was happening. Year started off pretty decent, pretty stable, but then February came and it's like dropping off the top of a roller coaster, right? So if you ever ride Fury 365, sorry for the drop. That's essentially what 2022 was. But we had some highs like the Crypto Bahamas conference. I think Crypto Bahamas is really where everything started to go crazy right after that. But in planning for that, Deltec was actually asked to be the secondary stage sponsor for and they titled it Trusting Disruption. Bruno at the time was based in Jacksonville and I was here in the Bahamas. So Bruno trusted me with a lot, put me on that and pretty much to make sure that we were being represented well as Del Chain because Deltec's an entire group, but also that we're trying to build a stage that would be unique or representative of a digital asset stage, not a banking stage at a crypto conference. And I essentially succeeded in that, honestly, by hiccup, if I could say. I met Rick Fox when I was flying to New York. So best of luck in the election, Rick, if you ever hear this. I hope it goes well.
Still need
But
GPS.
yeah, man, I met Rick flying to New York. My first flight had gotten canceled and JetBlue rebooked me and he was just sitting there. So message Bruno and I'm like, so Rick Fox is here. And Rick has like, 3 or 4 different companies in the space at this time. I said, I think it's a good chance to connect with him and maybe see if he's interested in joining or coming on stage for us. So yeah, just from talking and describing what Del Chain is, he's like, I'm in. I'm like, what do you mean you're in? And he's like, yeah, I'm in. Like, set up the call. Like, we'll discuss all the details. I'm in. So I'm like, mind blown right now. Cool. And from that, we built about 2 or 3 different panels. So just from the success that I was able to garner from that conference, like Bruno comes to the conference itself, super happy. And he's like, so you're no longer an operations guy. And I'm like, are you firing me? Like word for word, like face turns pale in Bahama, like belly breaking down kind of thing. Bunch of people around. I shame right now because I don't know what he's alluding to. Bruno is a poker player at heart, so you never know what Bruno's alluding to sometimes because he just keeps a straight face.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, you're no longer an operations guy. I'm moving you into like sales and business development. And I'm like, okay, why? Like, am I failing? And he's like, no, you're succeeding, but you talk well. You talk well. And you really take operations beyond what it should be. He said, so here's why you're going in sales. When you're actually proud of something, you speak highly of it and you sell it very well. And that's really been the driving force since then. So 2022, shortly after Crypto Bahamas, Bruno leaves Del Chain. I leave in 2023 with this idea that we're going to eventually get the band back together. I get the phone call last year and it's like, yeah, it's go time. And I'm like, now? And he's like, yeah, now. At the time I was at MetaQuotes, who creates the MT4 and MT5 trading platform as country manager, loving it. Boom. Bruno's like, yeah, it's time to go. It's time to come. And my biggest thing for making that transition from, selling software back into crypto was the fact that that was someone who took a chance on me. That was someone who really gave me a chance to walk into a whole new space and discover so much about myself. I've been happiest in the crypto space. So coming back into it, it was just like, yeah, why not? And to come back in with a mentor and a friend, chance of a lifetime. So here we are.
Yeah. Stuff like that is good because it's just goes to show you like your work doesn't go unnoticed, and when you work with people who actually give you opportunities, they're not trying to stifle you from opportunities. That is like so refreshing, because it really encourages you. It encourages you to put your best foot forward because a lot of people, they ain't trying to boost no one up. Like they're trying to defend what they got and they ain't want no one else get too much shine or credibility. So that's
Yeah.
really like,
Yeah, man. You know how things are on the island. Everyone trying to protect what they got.
yeah,
And, we only grow if
Mhm.
we share, if we build community.
that is facts.
That's
Mhm.
one big thing that drives the crypto community. So it's a difference in, the workspace and the atmosphere, everything.
That's facts. That's
Mhm.
facts.
And it's so important to share the information because as you continue to share the information and others learn, more innovation happens, more opportunities happens, and it becomes more like a chain effect, you know?
Indeed.
But but My question for you would be, what did working in crypto operations teach you about the industry that most people don't know?
I think it goes back to my story, right? So I remember my first week coming into crypto. I had cold hands. I honestly felt like I was going to be Patrick Starr in a sense. Like I was going to be dumb as hell in the space because it's like everyone else has been here for a couple years. I'm new. And you always feel that way when you coming onto a job, right? But this is a completely new side of finance now for me. So at this point, I would have been an auditor previously, realized I don't like auditing very quickly. Was in operations, was in trading, but now it's like, okay, I'm in a whole different asset class that's like very new, very volatile. Like I could make someone rich or I could make someone broke as hell. Snap of the finger, like and this is like during the whole
Like
Avengers
it's
Endgame time.
Thanos.
So on one hand, I feel like Thanos, and then on the other hand, it's like I feel like the Avengers, bro, because I'm helpless
Yeah.
against the Infinity Gauntlet. And Bruno did a great job of actually calming that down for me. Bruno was just like, you know, um, something I had said to him during my interview. I said, I try to make things make sense by referring to Blue's Clues. You use your mind, take a step at a time, and you can do anything that you want to do. And he's just like, this work is that simple. Like, if you succeeded in banking, you're going to succeed in crypto. The same logic applies. And at the end of the day, you're going to realize that crypto is simply just an asset class that is digital and allows you to do almost the same thing as banking, just a whole lot better and a whole lot cleaner. So that's the first thing that it taught me. So working in the space definitely taught me not to overthink yourself or not to sell yourself short. The second thing that it taught me is that adoption is subjective to who wants it, not necessarily who needs it. Because I think we all need digital assets at this point in the world, but we have to actually want to learn about it in order to succeed about it. And in order to start learning, that's what you have to do. You have to start. You have to start somewhere. A lot of people are simply afraid of starting. And that's a huge point. That's a huge mindset that still exists in the general financial landscape. When we look at TradeFi is starting to adopt crypto more and more and more. But if we look at smaller countries like ours or across the Caribbean, there's still this stigma about crypto. It's too risky, it's too this, it's too that. And it's just like, but have you ever actually stopped to think about the fact that it's not as risky as you think if you're simply using stablecoin for payments? Have you ever thought about the fact that it's not as risky if, for example, you're staking your assets? So you're generating yield now that could mitigate market loss. Have you ever actually stopped and thought about these things? So yeah, I think that these are the things that it taught me. And then it also taught me that in order for us to grow the industry, we have to have a sense of community. I think that 100 years ago, we had this idea of the stock market, and the stock market was doing the same thing as crypto back then, making people billionaires, but also making people homeless, like in no time because of the volatility in the market. It took more adoption to pretty much make stock markets what they are today, the success that they are today, adoption and legislation. And that's what it will take with crypto. But at the same time, we're in a different world where it's going to take community. Social media is so powerful. If there's more people out there bashing crypto than anything, crypto's not going to get far. So there'll be a few people that succeed in it, but not the global adoption that we hope for crypto to be. So I think in my space, it's always been trying to push the narrative that, hey, crypto has possibilities. We're not at the end yet, especially when we're in bear markets and people are like, oh, crypto's over. No, we're very far from the end. So people are quick to make assumptions, but yeah, I think that the biggest thing is that you have to understand that it's a journey. And that's probably the biggest thing that I learned from my time in crypto operations. While I've been here for 5 years, I still have miles to go before I truly consider myself like a veteran or an expert in the space. People would call me that, but I'm humbled by it. But it's like, dude, I still have so much more to learn.
We're all learning at this point, man. I personally don't think that there is a real crypto expert due to the fact that it's such a evolving space
Indeed.
that literally last year, a certain narrative that would have been popular is no longer even in a conversation anymore. Now it's something totally different. whatever coins you were initially interested in, you know, it's new coins now that are getting everyone's attention. So this space
Hmm.
moves relatively fast, but I think the real thing is just to keep at it and to keep looking at what is really well, basically to keep at it and to just keep on learning, man. That's basically it.
Yeah, yeah, you can't get settled. Older people, and I had a boss at CS who came from Canada, and he'd always say, "Oh, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks." I remember there was something I did, man. I think I was like onboarding this whole new reconciliation tool at Credit Suisse, and I wanted to show him. And like 5 minutes in, he's just like, "Kyle, if it makes your life easier, great, but please don't try to teach me this. I'm old. You can't teach an old dog." I'm like, okay. Cool. So yeah, that's the biggest thing when it comes to crypto. You can't get settled. You always got to be on the edge of your seat and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I think sometimes with some people, it's like they know like what they're good at and they're not good at. Just like, you know what, let me just focus on this. Like I can give an analogy. Like I used to play football in high school. They was running some sort of drills. And one of the coaches is like, all right, y'all don't need to do this. You're never going to throw a football. Like, you're not never going to be a quarterback. You don't have to learn this. I was like,
Literally.
let's focus on what you need to know. So I think some people kind of adopt that mindset, but not to say you shouldn't understand how different processes work. So you got to understand how different things work, even if you're not actively involved in the process.
Yeah, knowledge is power. And that's all it boils down to. Knowledge is power. It's that
Yeah,
simple.
definitely. All right. All of us, we're from the Bahamas. All of us understand crypto to an extent. Like you say, no experts up here. Everyone's still learning. All of us are familiar with blockchain. So, Kyle, for a Bahamian who doesn't understand blockchain, or who thinks like when you talk to them about blockchain, like you're speaking another language, how will you explain it to them so they understand it? Or like you explain like a real life scenario so they'll like get it.
Metaphors. Metaphors is the biggest thing, literally. A lot of people, as soon as they hear, "Oh, I work in crypto," they're like, "Oh, you so smart." Like, bro, you are too. What are you talking about? Like, let's take a step back. Like,
Yeah.
you are too. No, how do you work in that space? It's actually kind of easy if you really want to know. So I think the biggest thing is that when you're talking to someone from the Bahamas who doesn't actually understand blockchain, right? That's a lot of people, unfortunately, because when we hear about crypto, we hear, "Oh, I either gonna be super rich or I gonna be super broke." That's the general logic and the general perspective of crypto in the Bahamas, unfortunately. But when I have to explain blockchain, it's like blockchain is simply just something that allows the navigation or the movement of crypto, the recording of assets. So I coach at UB as well, right? As assistant coach for track and field. And I was having this conversation with one of my athletes who's a business student. He's actually studying accounting right now. And he asked me for some help. And I was able to explain everything to him. And he's like, "But you work in crypto now. Like, how do you still remember this?" I'm like, "Well, I got an A in accounting for one. But second, the accounting general ledger is so similar to a blockchain, bro. It's literally just a record of all the transactions. The only difference is the ledger is like a blockchain is a public ledger. It's a public online ledger. So, anyone can access it. Anyone can't access an accountant's books. So when you think about a blockchain in that sense, I break it down to that simple part of it. So I'm like, all of your movements, all of your buys, your sells, any withdrawals, deposits, all of these are shown on the blockchain. If you change your wallet address, that info still follows even especially if you change it on a public exchange. So Kraken, those other exchanges allow you to change your wallet from time to time to protect yourself. Good measure, but at the same time, that ledger still follows you. So I just tell them it's quite literally like an obituary of the wallet. I use these different metaphors. It all depends on who I'm talking to. Like if I'm talking to my dad, that's how I'd explain it. My mom actually works in accounting, so I may be a little more technical with her. But yeah, that's how I explain what blockchain is. Now, when I talk about the real world impact of it, I try to bring in more the idea of more use cases, right? So, like, let's say I go to Andros or I go to Mayaguana, one of the family islands, and I meet with a fisherman or a farmer, and I tell them, "Oh, I work in crypto," and they're like, "Oh, well, what good does that do me?" Easy use case: letters of credit, right? This is something that has been used for ages and ages and ages in banking and logistics to move assets like agriculture, produce, oil, all these different things, right? So assets don't move until money reach. That's in a nutshell what letters of credit are, right? Assets don't move until money reach, and ownership don't move until money reach. Crypto literally wipes away the need for those because you buy stablecoin, you do the whole payments in stablecoin, assets are moving in real time within minutes. Now, I'm like, for you as a fisherman or for you as a farmer, that's me saving you ultimately thousands of dollars. Where if you guarantee someone they get 100 grouper, but you know a couple of them could probably go buy it along the way, you could probably take the risk sending that actual 100 and they still be good because the movement from crypto is so fast. Banks will take you a day to 3 days. Your fish going bad during that time, and ain't nobody want no fish would smell like bad.
Mm.
That's simple, you know. So I think when it comes to explaining to Bahamians the real power of blockchain and the real power of crypto, it all depends on you bringing it back to use cases. I could talk to a young man or a young woman about crypto and be like, yeah, you can make money from it. But I could also talk to a businessman and say, hey, I could bolster your business. I think it all comes down to making it relevant to them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because the business person and the average person would look at it in different ways. So you have to drill it
Mm-hmm.
down to them in different ways. But I agree with your point on metaphors because I use metaphors all the time to explain stuff like in business and crypto and stuff. I use it all the time.
Yeah, I see all the videos, bro, and you be killing it with them. You definitely throw the metaphors in that. You do a great job at it.
Thanks, bro. I
Trust me,
appreciate that.
I take notes from Lambo on this stuff.
Thanks, man.
But I just want to dig into how you just talked about the difference between how you would explain it to businesses and how you'd explain it to the average person, right? Especially businesses. When it comes to businesses now, in this digital asset space, this crypto space, a lot of people just see it as kind of very risky or what's not, right? And, some businesses have already entered the space and they're happy. Other businesses are still a bit scared to come inside the space, or they just might not be, or they might just be curious about the space, but they don't really know how to think about the space. What I want you to tell us is, what is one major misconception that businesses have about entering the digital asset space?
So, before I go to the misconception, let's just talk about risk for a moment, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think risk is inherent in just about everything that you do. And I think that a lot of people, not just businessmen, but people, misconceive what risk actually are, right? The Bahamas has a gambling culture. We don't talk about risk when it comes to that. We don't talk too much about risk when it comes to that. The Christian Council is talk about it, but
Yeah.
but for the masses that in the web cafe and on their phone and they don't talk about it. But when it comes to crypto, it's you just could lose everything if you put. So I definitely think that risk is applied in a very subjective manner when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
things. And it's just like the things that are actually risky. Yeah, crypto is risky. It's a new asset. But the things that are actually risky, y'all don't fully understand. Like, we could go and talk about our currency even, our currency is risky if we think about it, because as the US dollar weakens, so does our currency if we think about it. But that's a whole different conversation to talk about. So you may think, yeah, like money supply going up, I have access to more money, but no, like you're actually losing the actual value of your dollar, actual strength of your dollar. And that's a whole different conversation. I think the biggest misconception that businesses have about entering the digital asset space is that people think that it's going to change their lives immediately, right? In my opinion, gone are the moonshot days. So we're not going to see no more 5-day Bitcoin rise 30,000, 40,000. Like, we're not going to see that much more. If we have another one, great. I hope Nancy Pelosi trade and someone publicize their trades beforehand so I could go get in on that. But I think that's the biggest thing. I think that's one side of it. People think it's going to be life changing overnight, and nothing is. Anything that comes in and it's life changing too fast, ain't necessarily too good, and that's what you got to understand. Digital assets are not designed to do that. Digital assets are designed to create more efficiencies for your business and satisfy use cases. I think the other misconception that they have on the flip side of it being life changing is I think also the fact that it'll be life changing, but people look at the negative aspect of it. People think that, oh, well, if I go and adopt digital assets now, I'm putting my entire business at risk. Not necessarily, because, for example, if I'm a businessman, right? Let's say I have a store and I'm receiving payments. I decide I want to receive payments now in crypto. I could receive payments in Bitcoin. I could receive payments in stablecoin. This is quite literally what they do in El Salvador, right? In El Salvador, Bitcoin is legal tender. In El Salvador, they also accept stablecoin. The value of stablecoin is pegged to a centralized currency. So very minimal market risk when it comes down to that, unless your stablecoin actually depegs. We ain't seeing much more depegments right now. So if you actually understand the asset that you're transacting with, I think that the misconception goes away. So the misconception really just lies in the understanding of the potential of the asset. I think that's the biggest problem there. So yeah, the biggest misconceptions that I see pretty much that people think it's going to be life changing, and that is too risky. Risk is involved in how much you understand. How much risk you take on is a measure of how much you understand what you're doing, I think. Because if you have a great understanding of what you're doing, then you know how to mitigate the risk. Quite literally. If you have a good understanding of what you're doing, you know how to mitigate the risk. When it comes to receiving assets, if you receive them on a public ledger, you know that like a public exchanges can be hacked. Common sense would say, if I want to mitigate that, get a hard wallet. Get a hard wallet, put 2FA on it, don't leave it plugged into my computer. Clear my cache whenever I come offline and stuff like that. So if you understand what you're doing, you understand the risk involved, then you just make common sense decisions to mitigate it.
Makes sense. I'd like to see more businesses like adopting digital assets. I would really like to see, especially here in the Bahamas, like more businesses
Yeah.
actually accepting Bitcoin and stable coins as a form of payment. Some do, but a very, 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 very small amount, you know?
Same here. The DARE Act allows us to, as far as I understand, it allows us to receive payments in digital assets. So I hope that we have greater adoption across the masses and not just across a small group of people. And I think that's the biggest problem that I have right now with the digital asset space in the Bahamas: accessibility and just making it available to the masses, creating more use cases for locals to actually benefit in the space. That's the biggest problem. But yeah, I hope that adoption picks up. It's quite literally just a change in technology and a change in a bit of banking. But yeah.
Now, speaking of adoption, a segue into this. You work a lot like with different companies and stuff, right? And you follow the industry. In the past few years, have you seen more institutional adoption or because I feel like at the retail level, I don't want to say it's topped out, but feel like it's just that over the past few years, it's just that institutions have just been adopting it much more, especially with enhanced regulation. Did you notice like a trend over the past few years as far as like businesses that actually reach out about it or about onboarding blockchain?
Yeah, definitely. So even the Swiss banks now are becoming crypto friendly. And when the Swiss actually make a big change like that, something big is happening, right? So it's a telltale sign that crypto's here to stay, because institutional adoption has dramatically picked up. People are now recognizing the use cases that you have in the space. And the people that are recognizing it are really the decision makers at these big companies. At the same time, I think that institutional adoption is what's being pushed more down our throats. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of lambasting still from a lot of institutions and financial powers. For example, won't call their bank's name because I'm pretty sure they got way more money than me. But their CEO was out in the public. When was it? Last year, 2024, crashing Bitcoin, but secretly piling up on droves and droves and droves of Bitcoin. Right? Like, come on, man. Either you with us or you ain't. That's how I see it.
And
That's
he's
how I
playing a
see it.
long game.
He definitely was edging he bets. So institutional adoption is definitely picking up. I think that's for a couple of reasons. Like I said, people are definitely having more understanding of the space, but on top of that, regulation is starting to pick up as well. More and more and more jurisdictions are realizing that the banking schematic that they have in place is not efficient. People are getting old on the job waiting on payments to happen, bro. Like from especially, in conversions from local currencies to USD, stuff like that. It's taking too long, quite literally. And USDT and other stable coins provide a way to appease and make life so much better. So institutional adoption is definitely being pushed down our throats a whole lot more than retail. I think smaller countries are definitely seeing more retail adoption though. And I say that, like I was in El Salvador last month, as you guys know, to see, for example, the amount of people out there not using USD, the El Salvadorian peso, like I didn't even see a peso out there. Like no one really accepted cash. No one accepted cash. Like it was a card, but over here we usually ask cash or card. Like I go to dinner, I go to buy a coffee, stuff like that. The question is crypto or card. That's simple. Like crypto or card, not cash, which is amazing. So
And is it like tap to pay, or is it like
they
just
tap to pay or QR code for your wallet. The QR code literally takes you to a web page where like the amount that you owe, if you're paying in Bitcoin, for example, it's in sats. But if you're paying in stablecoin, it's like, 397 USDT. And you could literally just deduct it right there from your wallet. It's amazing, honestly. It's so amazing. I really do hope that we have adoption soon, that we have more adoption and just start using stable coins here, man. That's it.
bare minimum?
That's insane. Yeah. So like how like when you mentioned like developing countries, I guess they doing it more like for a transaction base, and the world is trying to go cashless in itself. But like in the Bahamas, it's like cash is still king, at least for the time being. But hopefully we get to that point where we start accepting crypto and all that for everyday payments.
Yeah, all across Latin America, crypto is really running a lot of these businesses, a lot of them. To Abuela who's selling arepas and papusas and stuff like that on the road, she accepts in crypto, bro. So I don't understand why we can't figure it out where I would love to go and buy a conch snack from Bamboo Shack and pay in stable coin. I would love to do that or pay in Bitcoin. I would love that. I would love that, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, right there.
So I definitely hope that we have more adoption.
Earlier, we had a conversation about what is the reason why adoption is halted here in the Bahamas. Why do you think that adoption is taking so long for us in the Bahamas?
See, this is where now CryptoNoobz get up. It'll be in like the hardest podcast ever. Or y'all could be in some headache and y'all could be like, but we ain't never bring this back on the show. But hey, let's do it. Let's do it. So I think that the biggest reason why adoption is having so much problems is it's a cultural matter. Like me and Nelson talked about this, and it goes back to culture, right? If we look at what our administration does, right, when it comes to builds, they create builds that appease foreigners, and they don't take these builds and say, okay, like let's try to make this something that could actually help the masses. For example, the DARE Act, right? Love DARE. But at the same time, there was no educational push within, school systems or within actual like Bahamian owned companies and communities to say like, hey, you guys can actually accept crypto now. A lot of Bahamian businesses actually don't know that they can accept crypto per the DARE Act. They don't know that. So that's a headache. That's a headache in itself. If I compare this to another case, right? Medical tourism. We have a bill that actually like requires these alternative therapies like red light therapy clinics and stem cell clinics and all that to register with the government, right? That makes sense because that's how you prove legitimacy and everything. That makes sense, especially with medical tourism. You're playing with someone's life now. But we as a nation are unhealthy. Like Dr. Dwayne Science say, you're fat. I fat too, but you're fat, right? We don't represent the things that we actually try to sell on a global scale.
Yeah.
We don't as a nation. And I think that there's a huge gap there that needs to be solved. When I look at El Salvador came out a few years ago saying that Bitcoin is now legal tender. And when they said that, they meant that. They make sure everyone around the street had access to Bitcoin. How would they do that? Wi-Fi all around the place in El Salvador. If you got Wi-Fi, you got access to an exchange. If you got access to an exchange, you got access to Bitcoin. Very simple. So now the farmers who, work down the road from the volcano and all of that, and who working on the border between Honduras and Guatemala and all of that, all of them can be paid. Because the problem that they had was like only a third of their actual population had bank accounts. But now almost 80% of their population had access to Wi-Fi. When you look at that, that's similar to the Bahamas. We have 250,000 people on paper who live in Nassau, because I'm pretty sure it's more than that if you ask me.
Yeah.
But I a little bit of a conspiracist, right? But yeah, we have all these people who live in Nassau, but we have all these islands that don't have a bank. Like Nelson said, in 2026, we still flying money to islands on planes. Like, are we like trying to be Pablo Escobar again?
Yeah.
I watch American Made, bro. I into that, right? But yeah,
Plus,
it's crazy. Like, we still living in this archaic age, and it's like we have Wi-Fi on every island. Why not have greater digital asset adoption? And yes, we had, Sand Dollar, and we'll talk about that soon. That was supposed to be that use case to resolve that. But if we don't actually take the time to let the powers that be educate the masses, they'll never know how to actually use these stuff. It really just boils down to culture. We don't do a great job from the top down of passing information on. We hoard information, and that's just not how crypto grows. Crypto grows through community. That's the biggest thing that we're missing.
Yeah, that's very true.
If I may add on to what you just said, in a previous podcast, we had Kieran Rose, and once again, what he said was so impactful, and it kind of changed our mindsets, right? Because what he said was, it's actually a Caribbean thing, a Caribbean mindset, where people more or less want to hoard the information, versus when you actually come outside of the Caribbean, like, this information is freely passed. Like, they actually have institutions built just to spread the information when new innovation happens, and they have trainings, workshops, you name it, they have it. And the goal is to get the masses involved and participating inside of it. But yet, when it comes to us, we try to hold back. We try to keep the information to ourselves. And it's only kind of hurting the Bahamas, because once again, we are an archipelago. We are 700 islands and keys, right? All separated. We need to be able to send money from island A to island B for us to be able to build infrastructure on these various islands. And just as we would have had our conversation before this conversation, right? You would have educated me that inside like islands like Mayaguana, bartering and literally trading fish. People are trading fish for services, for goods and services. People have to trade fish. Why? Because now you have a problem where there isn't any physical cash on the island. On top of that, few people on the family islands, they're not accepting cards. They're not accepting debit and credit cards. They only accept cash, but there's no cash on the island. So how is it that people could trade? They now have to barter. They have to find different ways to actually get goods and services. So now you have to rely on the fisherman to go and catch fish so that he could go and be able to pay for certain things. And it's crazy that in the year 2026, that this is the same situation. We'll definitely go into Sand Dollar as well as other stable coins soon, but this is where these things come into play to actually solve these problems.
Yep. And don't get me wrong, trading one bottle of Hennessy or one bottle of Hoghead for some snapper and hogfish, that sounds like a deal to me.
I mean, that's what you're gonna get
sounds like a
anyway. You might as
deal.
well cut the middleman out. You're straight to the sauce.
Exactly. But yeah, man, that's the case on the islands. If the ATM break down, banks ain't necessarily getting out there right away to fix that ATM. That's one of the problems. That if you no money on the island, you gotta borrow. You gotta borrow or do a bunch of IOUs. And at the end of the day, island man want their money, bro. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's been saying to me, like, sometimes where it was like a utility company had some sort of issue on our family island, and they issue a statement saying our technician is coming on the flight to resolve the issue. And I was like, and part of me was like, hold on, y'all ain't up the one station. Our friend of mine, he live on the island, and he said, for the fellas who work there, they know what they doing, and this, that, the third. And I was like, I ain't trying to get too deep into that, but it just reminded me what you say. Like, it really is crazy.
Yeah, but we got our island set way back. And I feel like every island has a purpose, but it takes some level of development, all right? Every island needs some level of development. Like every island, we need banks. We need banks. We need actual businesses though. You could have the big grand purpose, like for example, marijuana. I believe that should be the fishing capital of the world, if you ask me. You could fish there without bait. I definitely think that infrastructure is needed, and infrastructure involves banking. It involves having, adequate power supply and adequate water supply and Wi-Fi. Like Elon Musk, you could line a couple Starlinks here instead of Starships. How about that?
And help us out,
Quite literally, man.
Now, that being said, right? And I'm glad that we just had that, because the next question that I have here for you is actually when it comes to stable coins, right? They're becoming more like the central ecosystem. Like my question is actually, are they becoming the central ecosystem, or are they just a bridge to crypto adoption, or is it like a really long-term use case? What is the end result of stable coins and us adopting stable coins and using stable coins?
I think stablecoins right now have a long-term play as a payment tool. It's as simple as that. But stablecoins are now becoming more useful in generating yield and things of that sort. For example, Tether, who creates USDT, king of stablecoins, they are one of the biggest buyers of US Treasury bills and Treasury bonds. So they pretty much buy those to generate some yield, create profit for themselves, to keep themselves going, and they're able to now buy those for the most part between using cash, but also using stablecoin. So yeah, I think stablecoins are definitely long-term play payments, long-term and simple play payments. Let me say that. And that's because a true stablecoin is pegged to a centralized currency. It's almost similar to a CBDC if you think about it, but just a decentralized asset that can move in real time in very little time. So that's why, for payments, it makes perfect sense. I think stablecoins are almost starting to differentiate themselves from being crypto in that sense, because, yeah, they have some store of value being pegged to a centralized currency, but it's really a payment tool if we think about it. Whereas crypto is becoming more a store of wealth and moving away from its original purpose of being P2P. But that's a whole different conversation right there. That's a very big conversation.
That's a deep conversation.
Yeah, that's a very deep one right now. We could go all day.
All right. With the recent collapse of like what's going on like with Bitcoin, where the price of Bitcoin is just plummeted compared to like all-time highs, right? When you're meeting with potential clients during this time, do you think like their attitude shift, or is like more so they're more keen on protection or security at this point? Do you think they take a more defensive approach during these times, or some of them see it as more opportunistic?
I think it all depends on their knowledge level of crypto, right? So those that have been in the space for a while, those that are a little more educated, definitely see it as opportunistic. But those that are newer, those that are a lot more skeptical and still in that educational space, like, yeah, we use crypto, but we don't, like that. They see it as more of a risk. I believe that crypto's here to stay. Working in the space and going through the ride that has been the past 5 years has definitely told me that, we survive FTX as a nation and as a whole asset class. We survive FTX. So I think that crypto in the Bahamas is here to stay. I think that crypto in general across the world is here to stay. We survived even after FTX. We survived USDC depegging, where now when that happened, I was scared. Not gonna lie. I was drinking plenty of liquor in them couple of days. But USDC repegged and all was well in the world. And I was back to drinking water. But yeah. So that's how I see it. I think that their perspective or their position right now pretty much is based on their knowledge of the space. Because those that are educated, those that are not educated are going to be scared, right? But here's what I would say to them. Gold just took a whole 20% plummet while I was in El Salvador. Like literally that Friday, Tether's there presenting XAUT, which is their gold token. Gold is falling 20%. Nobody moved because everybody educated about it. Everyone's like, yeah, gold is a store of wealth. Gold is this, gold is that. Globally, not just at that conference, but globally. Crypto take a tumble. Oh, crypto's done. Crypto's done. What's the difference, bro? Like, it's still a store of wealth. Yes, it's a newer asset, but crypto has to literally just go through the same phases that these other asset classes have went through.
Crypto then died and come back probably about 12 times.
Yeah. More lives than a cat. Trust me.
Going back to our initial conversation about the Bahamas and it being a digital asset hub. Initially, you said now some of the things that we need to do to become a digital asset hub is, we need Wi-Fi on the other family islands. And definitely we need to be using more of the stable coins and possibly even sand dollar. Like, what all else do you think that we need to actually bring the Bahamas like up to stuff when it comes to the digital asset space?
So we could do all that, but I think the biggest thing that we have to do is have banking integration. When I say banking integration, our banks have to loosen up and actually let us be able to buy crypto with our bank, with our Bahamian dollar bank accounts, right? So if you listen into this and you have the power to do that, ease up on us, man. Let freedom reign, please. Please, please, because at the end of the day, if we don't, and people that really want to get into crypto, they're going to find a way. If someone wants to do something, they're going to find a way. It's quite simple, hate to say it, but people come to the Bahamas all the time and don't have permits, and they live in there for years. Where there's a will, there's a way. It's that simple. So I think that we have to make international opportunities like crypto more accessible. I think that's where it starts. I don't necessarily mind a cap on it because, when it comes to banking and stuff, we have a daily cap on how much money we could spend on and a monthly and periodic cap on how much we could spend. I don't mind that. But I think that accessibility to international markets is what matters most. So being able to use my Bahamian dollar bank card at a crypto exchange is the way to go. If we don't do that, then yeah, we could have all the infrastructure and things like that, but all we could be doing is really fueling nefarious ways for people to get assets, which isn't good in the long run. It doesn't bode well. One thing that we always knew, that Bruno and I always knew from Dell Chain, is that banking and crypto go together. If banks don't work with crypto, we have very little access to crypto because you got to buy crypto with something. Unless you're a miner now, unless you're a Bitcoin miner and you got all kind of computers, then, go ahead, do your thing. But yeah, we don't have the resources. We don't have the cost basis for mining to happen in the Bahamas because BPL will quite literally take more than every Bitcoin you make, quite literally, for fun. Do that here. Can't do that here. I don't care if you got solar panels. So yeah, that's one of the biggest things it takes. And then the second thing is that I think it takes companies like mine, once things, open up a bit more, I think it takes companies like mine interacting more with the local populace, but also educating them. Education would be great if it came from the administration, from the powers that be, but at the same time, education is always best when it comes from people that look just like you. So I love going to the islands. Why not take the time to talk to a fisherman about how crypto could make him move assets a whole lot faster? If he owned a fishing lodge, for example, instead of him having all this cash on him, he could actually transact in crypto so long as infrastructure is in place for it. All of these things. So between accessibility and education, those are the two biggest things that I would say. And then with education comes just more and more and more use cases that get adopted because now that crypto's around, construction would be better, logistics would be better, all these different things. So yeah.
Since like we was talking about like stable coins and all that, right? USDCs, USDTs, and stuff like the sand dollar, right? How do you think that would impact like introduction of stable coins? How do you think that'll work? For cross-border payments, like when you compare it to like central bank digital currency, like how do you think stable coins compare and like for doing business, especially like like cross-border situations?
So this was another conversation that Nelson and I were having, and I actually learned a bit about Sand Dollar, where you can flip Sand Dollar back to USD. Did not know that. So yeah, if you are a party that operates with Sand Dollar and you could do that, call me. We got some business to talk about for real, for real, for real. But Sand Dollar in the biggest sense is designed to be the local transactional digital currency, right? It doesn't have much use case outside of the Bahamas, and that's for a couple of reasons. The actual BSD itself doesn't trade on international markets. It's a currency that's just pegged to the USD. But if you trade FX, for example, you're never going to be able to trade a Bahamian dollar. Even if you go to the little kiosk within like Dolphin Mall and all of them, the little currency exchange stores, they ain't taking your Bahamian dollar, not one bit. They tell you fold it up, put that back in your wallet. USDC and USDT allow you to interact on a global basis, allow you to interact with the people next to you, but also on a cross-border basis as well. So they do a couple of things, because they're pegged to a centralized currency, they stabilize, the cost of the transaction. So essentially making you avoid FX. Now, when whoever received them assets and they decide to convert back to a currency, that's on them. But yeah, when it comes to the transaction itself, it creates stability in that and also speed. You can move USDC and USDT in minutes. Sand dollar the same way, but Sand dollar's limitation is that it stops at our borders. On the other side, when you look at banks, if you do a bank wires are T plus 1 to some examples, T plus 5, all depends on the level of corresponding that you got to go through.
It's very true. All right. So we are approaching the end of today's podcast. My final question to you is going to be, if a young Bahamian wants to enter blockchain or digital assets, what skills should they focus on building?
I think they got to be able to think, I'll answer that the same way with the phrase that I used in the first question, use your mind, take a step at a time, and you can do anything that you want to do. I think that they have to be able to think, and they have to be able to think innovatively, not just to answer questions, but to evolve answers in the long run. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to blockchain and digital assets. It's an ever evolving space. So you have to have the mindset to be ever evolving, ever changing. You can't sit in the chair and get comfy. You gotta be able to continue getting out there, continue to learn, know how to speak as well. I think that that's one thing that we struggle with a bit in the space, where a lot of digital asset guys are, operations are tech geekies, and we go to these conferences and we see these guys and they are not sometimes able to speak well. They're stuttering through their words. They are shy, being they pants in some cases. So I think if a young Bahamian really wants to enter blockchain and digital assets, they got to present themselves well. They got to be able to think innovatively and progressively. And at the end of the day, I think they have to have a lot of flexibility. Be open to criticism as well, because at the end of the day, digital assets will face a whole lot more criticism over not just the next 5 years, but the next 20 or 30 years. We're still very early in this game when we think about it. If we compare, like, again, digital assets to the lifetime of the stock market has been around for just about 100 years, more or less. Bitcoin ain't hit 20 years yet when we think about it. We ain't 20 years into digital assets yet. So that's really one way that you gotta look at it and consider it. We're still very early in this game, and there's a whole lot more to be learned. So if anyone's coming in this space, be prepared to learn. As a track and field coach outside of digital assets, I always tell my kids, like, in order to succeed in this space, you have to be a student of the craft. That's how I succeeded in the sport. You have to be a student of the craft. And that's quite literally what it will take for anyone, even me. I've been in the space for 5 years, but even me, if I want to succeed long-term in the space, I have to continue to be a student of the craft. I have to be out there learning, knowing what the new market trends are, designing new products, looking at new jurisdictions, new tiers, stuff like that. All of these things I have to be doing. I have to continue evolving myself, so like this year, I've really been diving more into speaking, so these opportunities are great, really becoming more of a sales guy than an operations guy, because I much rather sit behind the computer and design products and make clients happy than get out and talk to hundreds and thousands of people and stuff like that. But it's a part of my job, and it's a level of evolution that has to happen. So yeah, anyone that wants to succeed, find a mentor as well. So find a mentor, be someone that is, able to think creatively and innovatively, not just answer a question on the spot, but evolve those answers, because your answer today should not be your answer tomorrow, especially in crypto, and enjoy the ride. That's the biggest thing there too. Lock in, but enjoy the ride, because there are going to be days when you will bam your head on a wall. And there are going to be days when you like, boy, crypto rocks. That's just what volatility is. Volatility is not just a market volatility thing, but because this is an evolving space, volatility happens across users. It happens in our communities. So it's that simple.
This makes sense. I like that.
Well, Khyle, once again, we thank you so much for joining us on the CryptoNoobz Podcast and giving us so much information about stable coins, infrastructure, and so many other things. Could we just get some of your social handles so that people could find you after the podcast?
Yeah, man. So you can find me on Instagram at Khyle.Anthony. You can find me there. You can find me on Facebook as Khyle Higgs. You can find me on LinkedIn as Khyle Higgs as well. I do not have any apostrophes or anything. No gang sign in my name. I'm not an ABM guy or a Jaffer's Cash, nothing like that. My name is my name. And then on Twitter, you could find me as Higgs_Khyle. So yeah, I'm all around. Always happy to take a conversation at any time from anyone, just about anything. I like shenanigans. I'm a part-time comedian, I like to say, but happy to talk about crypto. Happy to, if you send me a reel on Instagram, even I appreciate it. Cause some days be rough. You take that little 2-3 minutes to watch that reel, I can laugh and that can make my whole day. I appreciate you for that. But yeah, that's how to reach me.
And let us know about Unique Digital Assets. What is it that you guys do, and where could we find Unique Digital Assets?
Yeah. So Unique Digital Assets is positioned to be the one-stop solution that bridges the gap between traditional needs in finance and crypto needs in finance. So we provide a myriad of solutions such as trading, being OTC trading and on and off ramping. We provide same-day settlements as well for traders. We also provide custody of digital assets on a cold storage solution. We have a partnership with Ledger Enterprise. We also provide yield solutions. So, for example, in a market like this that's had a downturn, our yield solutions are a very good way to hedge against any notional loss, but also long term to generate more assets without necessarily trading. And then we provide payments. Payments is something very big that we do to resolve a lot of needs for our companies, for individuals as well. And then if there's any other use cases that clients may have, we're always happy to hear about it and see how best we can assist them. One big thing that UDA is going to be doing in the near future is tokenization of real world assets, equities, real estate, all of those. So that's our next frontier. And very soon, you could even look out for our card program that will be crypto supporting as well.
Awesome.
That's what we
Good
need.
stuff, man.
Well, everyone, that's been this week's episode of the CryptoNoobz Podcast. Once again, hit up Khyle, hit up Unique Digital Assets, and we'll see you next time. Have a good
It was
one.
a blast, guys. Thank you.